Was there a golden box of incredible power that went before the Israelite army and destroyed their enemies?
There was never a biblical Ark of the Covenant. It's as fictional as the search for it in Indiana Jones in the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
There is ample archaeological and historical proof that the Ark of the Covenant exists exactly as described in the book of Exodus in the Bible.
If this remarkable artifact ever did exist, where is it now? Has it been found? And what could it mean for the world if it is found and ultimately opened? Is there something so incredible about this device that it is actually deadly to the touch?
There's absolutely no reason to imagine that the ark that was in the temple of Solomon in Jerusalem in 586 BC, when that temple was destroyed, survives in any way, shape, or form.
The ark or the chest that is described in the Bible, if it ever did exist, has long since been lost.
The Ark of the Covenant definitely existed, and it's very probable that it exists today.
Ever since Indiana Jones began his search for the fabled Ark of the Covenant, this long-lost and all but forgotten artifact of early biblical literature has taken on new life. A number of writers, adventurers, archaeologists, and theologians have, in recent years, claimed to have knowledge of the whereabouts of the Ark. Some are certain that it is housed in a small temple in Ethiopia. Others are convinced that it is still hidden away in a secret chamber beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Still others claim to have actually seen the Ark in a cavern. Each group cites specific proofs for their contention, and in the next hour we'll closely examine each of these proposals as well as a few others. But it's not just the argument about where it might be that gets our attention. It's the question of whether such a device ever existed at all, and if it did, does it still possess its incredible power? Of all the stories in the Bible, this account probably generates the greatest controversy. Was there, in fact, a beautifully crafted casket that was infused with the power of God? A power that could rout armies, even destroy city walls? Could a band of refugees wandering in the Sinai desert have had the skill and technology to put such a marvelous piece of workmanship together? And if they did build it, is it reasonable to believe that the Israelite army always carried it before them into battle? At the core of these often heated discussions is an ancient wooden chest, covered inside and out with beaten gold and known literally throughout the world as the Ark of the Covenant. It is at least 3,500 years old, and the story of what it is and how it came to be is found here in the book of Exodus. According to chapters 25 through 30, God gave Moses explicit instructions for the construction of the ark.
The Bible tells us that inside the Ark of the Covenant were the famous tablets of the law, produced by the hand of God on Mount Sinai for Moses. Those tablets of the law represent the covenant of God with Israel. They are incredibly important to Israel, and they are supposed to be in the Ark of the Covenant. Also, a bowl containing the manna that God used to miraculously supply the food for the Israelites in the wilderness experience. Also, the rod of Aaron. These objects, together with the Ark of the Covenant, have been missing now for thousands of years.
The holiest and most sacred objects of the Israelite people were always carried before them as a constant reminder that the Lord God dwelt among them.
The fame of you both reaches into the tents of the whole nation.
God has seen fit to bless our work.
And He will bless this new work even more. For you are called upon to form out of the goods of the earth wood and stone, gold and silver, brass and iron, and cloths and skins, His holy objects, vessels and covers and instruments so sacred that their devising is out of God's own words,
We are but simple workmen, Lord. We're not the great architects of Egypt.
Please. Sit. First, God says you shall make an ark out of acacia wood, and it shall be 2 cubits and a half by length, and 1.5 cubits in width, and in height also 1.5 cubits. And inside it shall be covered with beaten gold, and the outside also shall be covered in fine gold, and rings of gold.
So Moses ordered the work to begin. All the fabric of the tabernacle had to be made and dyed to just the right color. The woodworkers and the metalsmiths, the dyers, the tanners, stone cutters, and wool spinners worked from sunup to sunset. According to the Bible, the ark was finished and placed in the tabernacle.
As serious scholars, we can all stop looking for that lost Ark of the Covenant and leave it to Hollywood, because that's where it belongs, in the realm of fantasy.
As serious historians, we can accept the historical accuracy of the Bible and the general reliability of the Jewish traditional sources. There is both documentary and archaeological evidence to support the existence of Israel's King Solomon and Israel's renowned Ark of the Covenant.
But what evidence is there that the Israelites had the technology to build the ark, and equally important, why was it so sacred to them?
The technology existed at that time to build the ark. Similar gold-plated shrines existed in Egypt long before the time of Moses. As to the question of whether the ark really existed, there are many non-biblical historical references to support the fact. To the Israelites, undoubtedly the ark was their most sacred religious object, for it served as the footstool of the true God, and His divine presence was once visible there.
The Israelites believed that the Ark of the Covenant was responsible to allow them to walk across the Jordan River when it was miraculously dried up. The Ark of the Covenant was used when they surrounded the city of Jericho 7 times. The entire city fell into the ground, as archaeologists have verified.
For 40 years, Moses had led his people through the desert wastes of the Sinai Peninsula, preparing them for the day they would enter Canaan, the Promised Land. It was now up to Joshua to lead God's people into Canaan and help them possess the Promised Land. But this great walled city called Jericho stood squarely in their path. It was the strongest fortress in the land of Canaan and the key to the success or failure of the Israelite mission. It was known as a place of fragrance, a walled city located in the midst of a vast grove of palm trees in the plain of Jordan. It is also the city that blocked the Israelites' conquest of Canaan. Weakened by their arduous trek through the wilderness, the Israelites were neither equipped nor trained to lay siege to such a massive adversary as the walled city of Jericho. But according to the Bible, God had instructed them to conquer the land of Canaan. This was to be their promised land. And to accomplish this, all they needed was faith. The battle would be won with a blast of a trumpet. By now, miracles were almost old hat to the leaders of the Israelites. There was the little matter of crossing the Red Sea on dry land and watching as the entire army of Pharaoh was destroyed, and the manna from heaven that had fed the Israelite nation for 40 years in the wilderness. Jericho is considered to be the oldest known inhabited city in the world, and around 1400 BC, when Joshua and the Israelites were instructed to go forth and conquer the land of Canaan, it was a heavily fortified city surrounded by a seemingly impregnable wall. The Bible tells us that the city of Jericho had to be destroyed. It was a pagan fortress of depravity, an abomination in the eyes of God, and a locked gate barring their way to the Promised Land. After Joshua crossed the river, he sent spies into the city whose reports caused great concern among Joshua's generals. The city was well fortified and well stocked with grain from the harvest, and there was a natural spring in the center of the city. Jericho could withstand a very long siege. These details will help us determine whether or not the biblical account is true.
Put ourselves into a terrible position. Now the river is at our back. We have all the armed cities of Canaan before us.
My counselors believe we should move south. Start with a smaller campaign.
If Joshua insists on this madness, we will waste the flower of our army on those walls. Better to attack a less formidable position until we have time to build up our strength.
Good news. We have good news, worthy generals. The Amorite bastion is fat and ripe for an attack.
When will that be, General?
By the first of the new moon, brave Zebulon.
That is a mere 7 days away.
God made the entire universe in less than that. 7 days, and Jericho will be ours.
Have you some news from the city? Would they give in without a fight? Are they asking covenant of us?
They scorn us and our presence. They are as strong and well supplied as we had imagined. They could withstand a siege of years.
Then how do we make this powerful pagan fortress ours? Surely not by throwing ourselves against those high and remorseless walls.
With faith, my able and worried commanders, God has spoken to me. And I will tell you the plans, for we begin at the break of dawn.
By your leave, mighty Joshua, we have less than 20% of our fighting men here. It will take weeks for us to strengthen our army.
This victory will not come by the strength of our arms, but by the power of God. That is why there is to be no prize-taking, no looting, not one single armor of grain.
No prizes, no rewards. If the city is full of grain, it would feed our people for months.
Nothing, generals, is to be taken from the city. Our only purpose here is to destroy this abomination with the sword and with fire.
Perhaps, great Joshua, we might know how the Lord would have us do his bidding.
The ark will be called forth and placed in the center of the march. 7 priests with 7 trumpets will precede it. Each day, we will go forth in battle array and march around the walls once. No sound will come from the ranks. Only the blare of the trumpets will be heard.
Joshua had just told his stunned generals the string of miracles that marked the Exodus right from its beginning was going to continue through at least one more spectacular event, and the Ark of the Covenant, which had been the centerpiece of so many of the miracles, was to assume that role once again. This would be its crowning achievement. For 6 days, the line of march went silently around the city walls, except for the sounding of the trumpets by the priests. Then, on the 7th day, the Israelites made 6 courses around the walls in complete silence. But at the end of the 7th march,
Israel! Cry glory! Cry vengeance! Charge!
what we've seen is the vivid picture portrayed by the biblical account of the destruction of Jericho's walls. But is it possible?
For many years, scholars thought that the story of Jericho was a mythical legend. When the archaeological evidence is properly interpreted, however, we find it agrees with the Bible in an amazing way. Jericho was a very strongly defended city. It had 2 mud brick walls surrounding it. The archaeological evidence indicates that those mud brick walls collapsed, as described in the Bible, and probably that was due to earthquake. Remnants of that wall are still there today. In fact, I have one of the mud bricks right here. It's about 3,400 years old. The city was surrounded by an outer stone revetment wall about 12 feet high. On top of that was a mud brick wall about 18 feet high. This is what the Israelites faced as they marched around the city for 7 days, according to the biblical account. Behind those walls was a massive earthen embankment that surrounded the entire city. At the crest of that embankment was yet another mud brick wall about 18 feet high. As the archaeologists excavated within the city, they found abundant evidence that there was earthquake activity at the time the city met its end. When they excavated at the base of this outer stone revetment wall, they found piles of collapsed mud bricks. Now, even though these mud brick walls collapsed and fell, the stone wall, the 12-foot high stone wall, is still there today. How did the Israelites get over that? Well, the way that the mud bricks fell, they formed a ramp so that the Israelites could merely go up over that ramp and into the city and set it ablaze. This gave ample evidence that the biblical account was entirely correct. In the Bible, we're told that the walls fell flat. Within the city, they found great quantity of grain. It was very evident that the end came just after harvest time. It's very unusual to find large amounts of grain in an ancient site. Here at Jericho, they found in almost every building great jars full of grain. Usually that would have been plundered because it was very valuable. The Bible tells us, however, that the Israelites were forbidden to plunder the city, that it was to be offered up to God. Also, the fact that there was a lot of grain there indicates that there was a very short siege of the city. The Bible says the siege lasted but 7 days. All of the details that the archaeologists have found agree precisely with the biblical narrative.
The ark was used in battle after battle, and won victory after victory for the Israelites.
For 500 years, the ark was, for the Jews, the most precious and sacred object in the world. Not only did the Israelite army follow it into battle, the entire nation followed it to the Promised Land. As long as the people could see the ark, they were convinced God walked among them. It's easy to understand why the ark was of major significance to the ancient Israelites wandering in the desert without a homeland. But why should modern Israel, or Christians for that matter, be concerned about the ark?
The book of Revelation speaks of the ark being seen in heaven. And I think Christians are excited about the ark because of the fact that it was a gold box. But to get excited about the ark and forget what it contained is like a bride getting excited about the box that the wedding ring came in. The ark was the Ark of the Covenant. The covenant was the 10 Commandments that were in the ark. So the ark contained the 2 tablets of God's law, those 10 Commandments, were an expression of God's character and His nature.
Here we begin to understand that the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant goes far beyond the question of where it might be today. For example, just which ark are we looking for?
We often forget that Moses received different parts of the law on Mount Sinai. On 2 different occasions, he was given the law, and it's recorded in the book of Exodus. Later on, we find that that law was recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. In Exodus 24, God instructs Moses, as recorded in the scripture, "Come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give thee the tables of stone, and the law, and the commandment, which I have written, that you mayest teach them." A little bit later in Exodus 25, he tells Moses to, as the scripture says, to take the testimony, put it in the ark that was made. Now this is a critical verse in light of what happened next.
Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the tablets just as God had promised. But when he saw the people debauching themselves before the golden calf, he flew into a rage and smashed the tablets.
You are not worthy to receive the law of God!
After cleansing the camp of idolaters, Moses asked God to give his people another chance, which was granted.
The Lord said to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke." And God goes even further. He orders Moses to bring another set of stones to the mountain, And on that new set of stones he writes the 10 Commandments. Those stones, then, are placed into the ark.
And unlike the detailed instructions of the first ark, in Deuteronomy Moses said, "And I turned and came down from the mount, and put the tablets in the ark which I had made, and there they are, as the Lord commanded me." Not all Bible scholars agree that Moses talks about 2 different arks, although it's clear that there were 2 different sets of tablets. Can it be that there is more than one ark? Was there yet a third ark built by Solomon as a gift for Menelik, his son, by the Queen of Sheba? Or even a 4th ark, built by the Israelites as a decoy to prevent the real ark from being destroyed by the armies of Shishak? And what of the ark John the Revelator tells us he saw in heaven? Our search continues. A number of modern writers, adventurers, and archaeologists have suggested they know the whereabouts of the ark today. These locations range from a sunken island off the coast of Africa to a vault beneath Golgotha in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, all of them seem to have some compelling historical and scriptural reasons for their conclusions. And there's even one area in which all the sources, the books of Kings, Chronicles, the Septuagint, the Talmud, and Josephus, seem to be in agreement: when and under what circumstances the ark was lost. According to 2 Chronicles, when Shishak, the king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem, he carried off the treasures of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything. But if Shishak took the ark, which ark did he take? When David became the king of Israel, he brought the ark to his new capital with a great deal of fanfare. But apparently everyone had forgotten about the ark's great power, and that it was forbidden for any but the Levites to touch it. That David had the true Ark of the Covenant was soon made clear. This was the ark King David would try to bring into a newly built temple, but it would be his son Solomon who would eventually make that dream a reality.
David was a warrior, and because of that, God prevented him from building the temple. But his son Solomon asked for wisdom, so he was allowed to construct the divine sanctuary, and built what is reputed to be the most beautiful and elaborate temple ever built. And in it, in the Holy of Holies, he enshrined the fabled seat of God's power on earth, the true Ark of the Covenant. But from that time, the Bible falls silent about the Ark. It is mentioned once more only, and that is in the book of Jeremiah, and with an air of finality. Jeremiah says, "The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, it will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made."
If you love a mystery, well, this is where it starts. There is no mention again of the Ark in any active sense, but legends and stories, there are more than enough. One of these is the 2-ark proposal. In the Ethiopian version, cited in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Solomon is supposed to have had a duplicate of the ark made, which he gave as a present to Menelik, his son, by the Queen of Sheba. But the wily Menelik substituted the replica for the real ark, which he then carried to his capital in Ethiopia.
There is, in fact, an unbroken historical tradition in the royal chronicles of Ethiopia that they have the Ark of the Covenant. But how reliable is that tradition?
Historians, biblical scholars, and members of academia, by and large, do not accept the story out of Ethiopia. But most of them have never been to Ethiopia. They don't understand the basis of its claim. They just have a feeling that the Ark of the Covenant is so important that it never would have found its way to some remote part of Africa.
There is a building, an underground temple in northern Ethiopia, in the city of Axum, underneath a church which is today called the Church of Zion. This building is claimed to contain the true Ark of the Covenant. They, in their history, claim that they kept it there guarded in this underground temple by Jewish priests who are led by a young boy who is chosen at the age of 7, the guardian of the ark, and this boy stays inside the Holy of Holies and guards the ark night and day until he dies. He comes out into another room where he is fed and his needs are taken care of. But the Ethiopians claim that this is how the ark is guarded, together with armed guards, and this has taken place, they claim, for 3,000 years.
Regardless of what others say or believe, one thing is certain. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church worships a relic they believe to be the true ark. It is protected by a guardian, a Coptic priest who never leaves the premises and never allows anyone to see it. At age 7, the new guardian is taken into the temple. He will be the only person to look behind the faded red drape of the Holy of Holies until the day he dies. Other Christian churches throughout Ethiopia also have replicas of the ark tucked away in a room they also refer to as the Holy of Holies. Should something happen to this replica, the church is considered unconsecrated. Even the replicas are considered so sacred that people will wait for hours just to be touched and blessed by their guardians. There can be no doubt that the Ethiopians regard their possession of this holy relic not as a legend, but simply as history.
We are by now in the compound of the monastery church of St. Mary, and this is blessing for you. Welcome to the monastery church of St. Mary and to the Holy Ark of the Covenant.
Is there any evidence that would back up the Ethiopian history outside their Kabr Nagast? Well, I have a photo here, and this photo is of a mural that is found in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. This mural shows the Queen of Sheba's marriage to King Solomon and the ark being taken down to Ethiopia where it was left. I'm holding in my hands a document from the Ethiopian government. This is the communist government of Ethiopia that talks about Ethiopia's history. It claims that they do have the Ark of the Covenant. We know that in 1936, there was an attempt by Mussolini and his Italian troops that were invading Ethiopia to capture the Ark of the Covenant. This object, according to the B'nai B'rith Messenger magazine, in 1936 was moved to protect it from being captured by the Italian army. In 1965, as related to us on a program by Prince Mengesha Sevanun, the Governor General of Ethiopia, he, as a royal prince and as well as being royal Governor General, took Queen Elizabeth II of England in 1965 on a royal tour of Ethiopia, and he told us that he took her in to visit the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant is in the basement chambers of Zion of Mary Church in ancient Axum. The Ark Guardian, the priests, my father, and Emperor Selassie told me it's the real Ark and that it's there. Many famous people have visited the Ark at the church, including Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip in 1965.
To date, well over 100 of the most powerful people in the world have visited Ethiopia for the express purpose of seeing the Ark. Could it be that heads of state still seek the Ark for its supposed power to destroy armies and protect whoever has it in their possession? What seems certain is that there is, in Ethiopia, an object that looks like the Ark, and that the vast majority of Ethiopians from the royal family on down believe to be the genuine Ark of the Covenant, based on a continuous, unbroken tradition that goes back thousands of years. But is there any evidence, any proof in that tradition to support that belief?
There are huge problems with this tradition. One being that the city of Axum did not exist during the days of King Solomon. It dates back to about the 2nd century BC, but certainly not 10 centuries before Christ. And for this reason, most academics have dismissed the story.
It is very clear, however, that the Ethiopians don't dismiss it. In fact, they not only believe the Ark exists there today, many of them give their lives in serving what to them is the holiest of holy objects.
The people who doubt the theory that the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia have not been to Ethiopia and seen the people worship at the site that they believe contains the actual Ark of the Covenant. They are committed. There are over 50 million people that believe that the Ark of the Covenant is there. This isn't some loose legend that was spawned or came about. I think it has to have some basis in history because these people have a firm belief that the Ark of the Covenant is there.
But if the city of Axum didn't exist at the time of Menelik, and the Ark somehow left Jerusalem during that period, Doesn't that mean the Ethiopian tradition is simply a myth?
Actually, it's not necessary for us to believe that Menelik took the Ark of the Covenant during the reign of King Solomon. There's ample evidence that the Ark of the Covenant left Jerusalem some 300 years later.
The research eventually led to a particularly violent time in the history of Israel, as recorded in the Bible, the reign of the idolatrous King Manasseh, who, among other blasphemies, installed a pagan idol in the Holy of Holies in the temple.
King Manasseh practiced wizardry and sorcery. He even brought pagan idols into the temple. The loyal priests wouldn't have allowed this. They would have taken the Ark of the Covenant someplace.
That's certainly a reasonable assumption. But move the Ark where? And what evidence is there that something as sacred as the Ark of the Covenant was ever taken out of the temple by the priesthood?
A Jewish temple was built outside of Jerusalem during the First Temple period. Now, this is an extraordinarily important development. There would seem to be no justification for the construction of a temple anywhere outside of Jerusalem. If you look at the biblical text on this, you'll find that the reason for the building of the temple in the first place is stated very clearly.
I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord.
Further investigation shows that the temple was built by the priests who fled from the wicked reign of Manasseh.
Dr. Adolf Hanna has personally been involved with the archaeology of Elephantine Island for over 20 years. According to Dr. Hanna, writing has been discovered that indicates the Ark of the Covenant was there and rested in this temple. This temple was built to the same dimensions as Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, but it was eventually destroyed. Why was it so completely destroyed? And by whom?
There was a conflict between the Jews and the Egyptians. It was standard practice for the Jews to sacrifice a ram every morning at sunrise. But this just happened to be the Egyptians' favorite god, Khnum. They didn't appreciate their god being killed every morning. The Jewish community was simply no longer welcome on the island of Elephantine.
The Ark, if it was here, vanished once again along with the people. But Dr. Hanna, based on his own research, has developed an interesting theory of the Ark's history.
According to Dr. Hanna, the Jews at Elephantine wrote a letter to Jerusalem asking for help in rebuilding the temple. But when the Jews in Jerusalem found out there was another temple, they were furious, and they rebuffed the Jews at Elephantine for having ever built it in the first place. The Jews at Elephantine Island felt not welcome in Jerusalem. They were no longer welcome at Elephantine, so they took the Ark of the Covenant and followed the Nile River south into Ethiopia.
Could it be that we are finally on the trail of the true Ark of the Covenant? Is it possible that it wasn't Menelik, but a group of Jewish priests who brought the Ark to Ethiopia? Do these young Ethiopian Jews know where the Ark might be today? The mystery continues to unfold. If the Ark of the Covenant was removed from its place in the temple to protect it from the desecrations of King Manasseh and taken to Elephantine Island, that still leaves two unanswered questions. How did the Ark get from Egypt to Ethiopia, and how did it come into possession of the Christians?
The vast Nile River system leads ultimately to one of two sources. The first one, of course, is Uganda. The other source of the Nile, the Blue Nile, where most of the water comes from, is in Lake Tana in Ethiopia.
One of the most surprising discoveries of Hancock and Cornuke's research was a small island tucked away in this huge lake in Ethiopia. Here, they uncovered a surprising history.
It is very difficult to get to Tanakirkos Island. It takes about 3.5 hours by small boat to get there. Lake Tana is a very large lake. It's one of the largest in all Africa. And the Ethiopians consider Tanakirkos Island to be a very holy place.
This tiny island is one of Ethiopia's most protected holy sites. Barely a mile long and covered with lush vegetation, it is highly restricted. Few are allowed to visit, and only men are welcome.
When I arrived at Tanakirkos Island, it was the most mysterious place I've ever been to. It's literally like stepping back into time. They grow their own corn, they make their own clothes, they live in thatched huts. They live as they did thousands and thousands of years ago. The monks that live on the island were once brought there by their parents in hopes that they could be worthy to live on the island where the Ark of the Covenant sat.
Is it possible that these holy men, who still practice rituals thousands of years old, have reliable information about the Ark of the Covenant?
They said when the Ark of the Covenant was first brought into Ethiopia, it was not taken to Axum first, but was brought to the island of Kirkos on Lake Tana, where it was venerated for hundreds of years.
The tradition of the island is that the Ark of the Covenant was placed in a tent called a tabernacle here on this rocky ledge. Undisturbed by archaeologists or souvenir hunters, this small plateau does in fact show evidence of such a tent. Holes precisely 13 feet apart and placed in a north-south to east-west direction can still be seen. It is not surprising that these socket holes approximate the size of the tabernacle described in the Bible. But is there any other evidence to support this tradition?
The Ethiopians and the monks showed me many implements that they said were from Solomon's temple. They showed us meat forks, bowls, stands, silver trumpets. I said, why weren't these implements taken to Axum with the Ark of the Covenant? They said when the country was converted to Christianity, they no longer needed these implements to be brought to Axum. So they were abandoned and left with the monks on the island.
According to the monks, this large brass dish, called a gomer, used in the blood sacrifice, this stand, and these large meat forks, also used in the blood sacrifice, are all artifacts that were left behind.
And if these objects are from Solomon's temple, they are the only ones in existence today.
Suddenly, all of the pieces of the puzzle start fitting together. We have evidence that the Ark of the Covenant left Jerusalem before the Babylonian invasion. Then we have a temple being built on the island of Elephantine, several hundred miles to the south. 200 years later, that temple is destroyed. And about the same time, we start hearing of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia on the island of Kirkos. The monks there say the Ark was there for 800 years, until the Christian king came and took the Ark to Axum.
I've heard stories, wild stories about the Ark and where it is and where it's been taken. The Ethiopians are firmly convinced and have convinced me that they have either a most incredible replica of the Ark of the Covenant or they actually have the real Ark of the Covenant as mentioned in the Bible.
This is an intriguing account of where the Ark of the Covenant might be located. But before we accept it as gospel, perhaps we should examine the even more provocative Israelite account. This tradition begins in 586 BC when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar and his armies were about to deliver the final destructive blow to Jerusalem. According to Jewish historians, this was anticipated, and the temple priests took precautions to protect the ark.
The sins of this people must truly be an abomination in God's eyes. It is just a matter of hours, perhaps even minutes, before Nebuchadnezzar and the raging Babylonians are in upon us.
We must not let the ark fall into the hands of the pagan. We must take it to Solomon's vault. The 6 of us are too old to carry the ark in the way that God instructed Moses.
We are young, Holy One, and waiting to serve God.
Give us your blessing and your order.
I send you to your death. You must be sealed within the tunnel.
My brother and I have lived our lives in the temple. We would end them here before any place in the world.
Your grace and forgiveness, Holy Ones. The walls are breached, and the Babylonians are pouring into the city. You must flee, now!
Quickly, brethren. We must do it quickly.
According to this tradition, the ark was taken by the priests and secreted in a vault under the Temple of Solomon that could only be accessed through an underground tunnel. It was thought lost forever, until now. The most important evidence that the Bible is literally true could come from the rediscovery of the Ark of the Covenant. That's why so many have looked so hard for it. But is there any way to reconcile the two traditions? Could there be an ark both in Ethiopia and under the Temple Mount?
When the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem, she had an affair with him, and the payment was the ark. She demanded the ark, and she took the ark back to Sheba, which is Ethiopia. Before that, it was called the Ark of the Lord. After that, it was simply called the Ark. And many people believe, and it could be, that a duplicate ark was made and put into the temple area, and the true ark was taken to Ethiopia.
Or could it be that all the searching is in vain? The book of Revelation states very plainly that John saw the ark in heaven.
Some confusion has been caused by the fact that Revelation chapter 19 refers to a prophetic vision in which the author describes seeing a vision of the ark in heaven. This is no contradiction to the fact of there being an earthly ark that is still in existence. The fact is that God tells us in the book of Exodus that Moses was commanded to make the earthly ark, as well as the tabernacle and all the objects, after the pattern of the original that was in heaven. So in other words, there has always been an Ark of the Covenant in heaven, as well as the earthly ark.
The Ethiopian tradition and the Israelite tradition, by the way, are not the only stories that support a precise location for the Ark of the Covenant. According to ancient Jewish writings, some contend the Ark is hidden on Mount Nebo in Jordan. Others suggest the Ark is hidden somewhere near the Dead Sea on the Jordan's west bank. And one American researcher claims to have found it in a stone-carved room under Gordon's Calvary near the Garden Tomb. According to this story, a man by the name of Ron Wyatt found the ark here underneath the place of the skull on January 6, 1982. After 4 years of digging, Wyatt said he found the entrance to Jeremiah's grotto, a room 14 feet by 22 feet by 8 feet high. In this room, he said he found items of furniture from Solomon's temple and the Ark of the Covenant. For political reasons, Wyatt said he was asked by the Director of Antiquities to close up the entrance to the grotto. Unfortunately, Wyatt died before he was able to convince Israeli officials to inspect his find further. The grotto, if it ever existed, has failed to excite the interest of archaeologists. But does anyone really know? And if there are those who have reliable information, do they know which ark is the true ark? Is it possible that the Ethiopian ark and the ark said to be under the Temple Mount could be the same? Have the Jews finally reclaimed their most precious religious artifact, the true Ark of the Covenant? The evidence for the Ark of the Covenant being or having been in Ethiopia is largely circumstantial, but archaeologically and historically, the evidence supporting that idea is very compelling. But what about the tradition of the Ark being under the Temple Mount? Is there any modern evidence to support this claim? In 1981, an excavation took place on Temple Mount. 3 rabbis made a discovery that very nearly set off another holy war between the Muslims and Jews.
If we look at this sketch of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, we can see subterranean passageways. Superimposing upon this a model of the temple, the Jewish historical sources tell us that there was a chamber of wood or a wood pen, underneath which was a secret chamber that King Josiah deposited the Ark of the Covenant in shortly before the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. In 1981, 3 rabbis entered through Warren's Gate, one of the original entrances to the Temple Mount. They tunneled through and came to an area in which they claim they now have direct knowledge of the exact location of the Ark of the Covenant within this chamber.
Do you believe that some of the temple treasury...
Yet Huda Getz, chief rabbi of the Western Wall, was one of the tunnelers in 1981. Rabbi Getz states that he has found the Ark of the Covenant and its contents, including the original 10 Commandments, hidden for over 2,500 years in a secret vault beneath the temple. These incredible discoveries were also witnessed by Rabbi Shlomo Goren.
We were excavating under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem when we came to an underground room deep beneath and in the direction of the Holy of the Holies. And it was the Ark of the Covenant that Moses placed in the 10 Commandments. When we came close to the Holy of the Holies, the Arab management of the Temple Mount they decided to stop our diggings, and they erected a wall in order to stop us from getting to the Holy Ark.
As to the contention that the ark under the Temple Mount is a replica, the same contention might as easily be made concerning the Ethiopian ark. There is really no other basis to support the Ethiopian claim than the Ethiopian traditions. And in fact, there are a great many replicas of the ark throughout the churches in Ethiopia that preserve this tradition. The evidence rather strongly supports the real ark being under the Temple Mount.
So the evidence and the testimonies for the ark being under the Temple Mount are also very compelling. Is it possible that two arks were made and both have been found?
The greatest Jewish rabbi in history, Moses Maimonides, in around 1200 AD, wrote a 14-volume series called the Mishnah Torah to codify Jewish law. In one of those 14 books, called the one that is dealing with the rebuilding of the temple, he tells us that there is a Jewish tradition handed down by the rabbis and the Talmud that Solomon was commanded to make a second ark, and that this second ark was sometimes used and taken out in battle. There is no additional evidence beyond this tradition, but there certainly is a written confirmation that there was a tradition of two arks.
Modern researchers are faced with the possibility that there have always been two arks, both sacred, both constructed by God's command. Could this be true? Is it possible that one contains the tablets prepared by God and broken by Moses, and the other, the tablets prepared by Moses and written on by the finger of God? If so, would one be considered more holy than the other? Is it even possible that both arks might now be back in Jerusalem? The black Jews of Ethiopia were rescued from persecution and death by an heroic airlift of the Israeli military during the violent closing days of the Ethiopian Civil War. This is a well-attested fact. But could it be that there was another rescue that took place about the same time, a rescue that has largely been kept a secret?
There is compelling historical evidence from the Ethiopian records, the Kaber Nagas, the Royal Chronicles, that the ark has been in Ethiopia for 3,000 years. However, I've had three independent sources, an Ethiopian Air Force general, an Israeli Air Force general, as well as a Canadian diplomat who was in Ethiopia at the time in 1991 when the Ethiopian Civil War ended, that this object was taken out of Ethiopia by the Israelis, who apparently flew into Ethiopia with a military plane, and these men, though they were elite military units, were composed of people from the tribe of Levi. According to the scriptures, only those from the tribe of Levi were allowed to touch the ark in the sense of carrying it by carrying the staves without touching the actual body of the ark. According to these rumors, the ark was taken secretly to Israel, where it remains waiting in secret until the time when the temple will be built and the ark would be placed once more in the Holy of Holies.
The Levites, we were told, were specially trained members of the Mossad. They made the entire trip standing up, their legs in braces. Could it be that the Levites of today still respect the historic power of the Ark of the Covenant? According to the report, at no time was the ark allowed to touch the floor or the ground until it was placed in a specially prepared site. According to our sources, the ark was returned to Israel with the full knowledge and cooperation of the Ethiopian government, and the Ethiopian Jews who were rescued are among those in Jerusalem who are now preparing to rebuild the third temple, which, according to tradition, will be the final resting place of the true Ark of the Covenant.
One of the most exciting events on the horizon today is the emergence of a temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem. And this is the third of three major events in Israel: the reestablishment of the nation Israel, the regaining of biblical Jerusalem by Israel, which happened in 1967, and now they are preparing to build the temple. This whole event is all tangled up with their messianic expectation, and to a biblical scholar, it's one of the most exciting things on our horizon.
The key to our direct relationship with God is the Holy Temple. And the main way that we are going about this is by actually producing, restoring, creating the vessels that can be used in the temple. Of the 93 basic categories of vessels that are described in the Holy Sources, we have so far created almost 60 vessels made of gold, copper, and silver, according to the original source material, and based on the complicated nuances and requirements of Jewish law. While our itinerary includes many of the vessels that are described in the holy sources to be used in the temple, the ark is one item which is not on our itinerary for recreation, because we are aware of the location of the original, which was hidden in the time of the first temple before the first destruction.
The evidence seems very strong that the Ark of the Covenant has indeed been found. But if it has, those who know of its precise location are still keeping it a secret. Is it possible that someday, soon, perhaps in our lifetime, the Ark of the Covenant with its precious artifacts will be brought out to a waiting world? What will it mean for all mankind if the actual covenant revealed to Moses is suddenly before our very eyes? Will it still have power to strengthen armies as it did the armies of the ancient Jewish nation? Or will it simply empower Judeo-Christian faith as it has done for the Ethiopian Christians and Jews for the past 3,000 years? What could this remarkable artifact bring into our lives? The answer to that question is definitely worth considering.